Hello. Today we are going to examine the life of Saint Martin de Porres, also known as the Saint of the Broom, as well as the Apostle of Charity. First of all, let's discuss the name Martin. It is a masculine name of Latin origin, meaning warlike, in reference to the Roman god of war, Ares, or Mars. In English, it is pronounced Martin. In Latin, it is Martinus. In Spanish, it is pronounced Martin. In Italian, it is Martino. In French, it is Martin. And in Korean, it is Maratino. A common English nickname for this name is Marty. In reference to the relevance of us discussing St. Martin de Porres today, his feast day is November 3rd. St. Martin de Porres was born out of wedlock in Lima, Peru, to a Spanish conquistador named Don Juan de Porres and a former African slave from Panama named Ana Velasquez on December 9th, 1579. Seeing that the child had some African features, Don Juan de Porres refused to acknowledge his paternity. Abandoned by his father, St. Martin de Porres and his younger sister Juana were raised in extreme poverty by their mother on the lowest rungs of Spanish colonial society. When Martin was 8 years old, Don Juan returned to Ana and claimed his 2 mulatto children, providing an education for Martin. When Martin was 12 years old, he was apprenticed to a barber, a profession that in 16th century society involved much more than cutting hair. There, he learned the rudiments of surgery, administering herbal remedies, dressing wounds, and drawing blood. At the age of 15, Martin applied to join the Convent of the Rosary in Lima, a Dominican monastery. Racial restrictions at the time dictated that he be given the position of tertiary, or lay helper, which he enthusiastically accepted. Side by side with his daily work in the kitchen, laundry, and infirmary, Martin's life reflected God's extraordinary gifts. Ecstasies that lifted him into the air, light filling the room where he prayed, bilocation, miraculous knowledge, instantaneous cures, and a remarkable rapport with animals. His charity extended to beasts of the field and even to the vermin of the kitchen. He would excuse the raids of mice and rats on the grounds that they were underfed. He kept stray cats and dogs at his sister's house. Both before and after joining the monastery, Martin suffered incidents of harassment that may well have been racially motivated. The monks for whom he was cooking would hide the kitchen's potholders, and one of the early stories surrounding the young holy man was that he could then pick up the pots with his bare hands and not be burned. Cleaning a toilet one day, he was asked by a monk whether he might not prefer life at the splendid offices of the Archbishop of Mexico. Martin responded by quoting the biblical Psalm 83, "I have chosen to be an abject in the house of my God rather than to dwell in the tabernacles of sinners." He qualified this remark by saying that he was not referring to the Archbishop as a sinner, but rather simply that he himself preferred menial tasks. He also wore robes until they fell apart, refusing the luxury of new ones. When Martin was 24 years old in 1603, he gave the profession of faith that allowed him to become a Dominican brother. He is said to have several times refused this elevation in status, which may have come about due to his father's intervention, and he never became a priest. As with any other famous holy man, Martin's life is surrounded by stories, and those stories constitute the primary means of remembering him at a distance of 4 centuries. The stories surrounding Martin are of 2 kinds. Some consist of testimony about his character and accomplishments by church officials who knew him, while others seem to be of a more popular character, arising among Lima's impoverished populace and coming down to the present time, partly via oral tradition. St. Martin also cared for the sick outside his convent, often bringing them healing with only a simple glass of water. One day, an aged beggar, covered with ulcers and almost naked, stretched out his hand, and Martin took him to his own bed. One of his brethren reproved him. Martin replied, "Compassion, my dear brother, is preferable to cleanliness." One day, he found on the street a poor Indian, bleeding to death from a dagger wound, and took him to his own room until he could transport him to his sister's hospice. His superior, when he heard of this, reprimanded his subject for disobedience. He was extremely edified by his reply. "Forgive my error, and please instruct me, for I did not know that the precept of obedience took precedence over that of charity." The superior gave him liberty thereafter to follow his inspirations in the exercise of mercy. He also treated victims of bubonic plague without regard to race or background. Martin also founded in the city of Lima a residence for orphans and abandoned children. Martin also begged for alms to procure necessities the convent could not provide. In normal times, Martin succeeded with his alms to feed 160 poor persons every day and distributed a remarkable sum of money every week to the indigent. It is also said that Martin loved animals of all kinds and seemed to have unusual skills in communicating with them. He would apply his medical skills to the treatment of a wounded dog found wandering the streets with the same energy he would devote to a sick human being. Many stories attest to Martin's exceptional piety. He was said sometimes to be surrounded by a bright light when he prayed, and to be levitated off the floor of a chapel by sheer religious ecstasy. He subsisted for days on bread and water and would do penance for sins by whipping himself with chains. Martin was said to be capable of bilocation, and individuals from both Africa and Mexico swore that they had encountered him in their home villages, even though he was never known to have left Lima. Patients under his care spoke on several occasions of his having walked through locked doors in order to render medical help. Martin died of a fever in Lima on November 3rd, 1639, at the age of nearly 60. After he died, the miracles and graces received when he was invoked multiplied in such profusion that his body was exhumed after 25 years and said to be found intact and exhaling a fine fragrance. Despite his renown throughout Latin America, recognition from the Catholic Church was slow to come. He was beatified in 1837 and then canonized as a saint by Pope John XXIII on May 6, 1962, with a contingent of 350 African American Catholics in attendance. So what can we learn from the life and spirituality of St. Martin de Porres? I do not think that the significance of St. Martin de Porres was that he healed the sick, gave ceaselessly to the poor, cared for all of God's creations with compassion, nor do I even think that it was his wholesome piety or devotions. I believe that St. Martin de Porres' profound and consummate humility was based on his knowledge of the greatness of God. He was intimately aware of the reality that all things come from God, and that we can do nothing to fully return this favor. He looked not within himself or even his brothers to discover the strength he needed to care endlessly for those in need. Instead, he grew up humbled by Christ. This is the lesson that I feel that we must learn from examining the life of St. Martin de Porres.